it's very important to know Leon's done a great thing because access is an enormous issue, obviously, in mental health. And cognitive behavioral therapy, Aaron Beck is the founder, and what he was treating was depression, and essentially recognized and felt that mood, depressed mood in particular, followed the series of thoughts that a person has about themselves. So the principle is you find yourself in a mood, uncomfortable, dysthymic, dysphoric, and you have to stop. And you have to say, okay, where is this coming from? What is the cause of this mood? Which is what the actor or therapist guide in Bloom was doing, was to say, we're going to stop, we're going to look at the mood you're in, angry, sad, and we're going to look at the thoughts that have generated this mood. You've just lost your job through no fault of your own. It's COVID, and 40 million people have lost their jobs. But the individual may feel depressed about it, obviously, but really that they're a failure. And that's what's tanking them, is their own thoughts about this loss. They're a failure, they're not, other people at my company didn't lose the job. Why was my position liquidated? And the nature of the mind, unfortunately, is to look for the reasons that things are happening on the outside within. It's something I did. It's something about me that's put me in this position of being unemployed. And
like
that
shame.
is true.
Like it's shame, more
It's
or less?
no, it's an attack. It's
Okay.
a self-attack. We attack ourselves in silence. And cognitive behavioral therapy, which is extremely effective for depression, although not the most effective treatment for depression is a combination of psychotherapy and medication. So it's the combination if you're talking about major depression. So, but CBT is remarkably effective, and it's an important, anybody, whether you're an analyst, a psychopharmacologist, principally only use CBT, nobody's pure in their approach. Suffering is suffering. And humans require all of these efforts in order to get out of, for example, a depression. So CBT would be one method. Shrinks, whether they're analysts or not, employ cognitive behavioral therapy to treat people. And it is something, interestingly enough, looking at that app, though you can do it by yourself, it's more effective with a therapist. That's another finding in the research. So that guy on the app being present and acting like your shrink is a very good idea. It's a very, very good idea, because most of the mental health apps I've seen leave you alone with imagery, abstract imagery. And so to not be left alone is key when you're suffering mentally. And I mean, I'd like to say, the major issue psychically, I think, with COVID has been isolation. We're isolated. And as a species, that is not how we evolved. We evolved as a band of essentially 17 people, 2 reproducing couples, infants, some old people, particularly old women. That's who survived the longest. And we populated the globe from Africa to Patagonia in 15,000 years in this small kind of band. And we were really never alone. And so this sudden, if you're single, if you've, you're exactly, so many people in America living alone, and COVID has cut you off from your normal engagements with people. You were talking about, the future, the wall coming for need in mental health. It'll be coming because of this isolation. That's one of the principal movers of what we're facing. And I think the I think we're going to need every modality we have on hand. We're going to need CBT. We're going to need increased access. We're going to need money. We're going to need funding. And we're going to need regime change, because none of that's going to come under the current government. So, I mean, I don't want to get political immediately. I'm not a political analyst, but it goes without saying.
Politics impacts our mental health, clearly.
It has been. It has been. We've had, as you've said in the background, we've had climate change brewing in the backgrounds of our heads. We've had 3 years of Trump trauma.
Trump trauma.
Trump trauma. It's undisguised brutality. And then we were hit with a microscopic infectious agent, a little piece of mRNA coated in a bit of protein that has changed our world, disrupted our world.
A virus, in other words.
A virus. And in the midst of our virus, we watched a brutal murder. And I think the movement, Black Lives Matter, and this surge by the American populace to march alongside African Americans is because we've been hit. COVID softened us. It's a surge of empathy with the injustice, the disenfranchisement, the maltreatment, the horrific knowledge that we're living in a country with a clown at the helm who has no plan except to let many die. And we feel helpless and out of control, as African Americans must feel every fucking day in this country when they walk out the door, not knowing if they're going to be stopped.
Mental health? Is there a larger mental health, let's say, epidemic in the Black and Brown community because of what you just said, generally?
Well, think about this. I mean, one of the ways that we've all been surviving, even pre-COVID, with Trump in the office, with climate change, setting Australia on fire, with social inequity, all of the income inequity, everybody's feeling it. And the only way we've been able to function is to compartmentalize, which is to hold your anxiety at bay and try and focus on your task at hand. And I was thinking about being a mother. I have 2 sons, and to be a Black mother of sons, I don't think I could compartmentalize. It is unbelievable to think about the fear of raising a child who's African American and letting them out in the world at 17 to go off with their friends, not knowing whether they'll be stopped, not knowing whether they're going to come home. So yeah, the stress that we feel is 1,000-fold in the Black and Brown people community because of horrific racism. And it's a chronic stress. They're under chronic stress. And now COVID's been going on long enough that we're all enduring chronic stress. And I can speak to that because the consequences of chronic stress are legion, really. Your brain is adapted to be able to survive life-threatening attacks. This is an existential attack. COVID.
Like fight or flight kind of thing?
Fight or flight, exactly. The brain is ready for, say, attack by a lion. And everything is meant to be wired in that moment for survival. So the brain tells small glands above the kidneys, called the adrenal glands, we need steroids. We need steroids to get out of this. The steroids start pumping from your adrenal glands. And this has been going on for 11 weeks for all of us. And these corticosteroids communicate back to the brain, and they say, listen, we need every single neurochemical available to run out of here, to jump, to escape, to bring what we need. And that is this enormous flood of dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and adrenaline. And if this,
Neurotransmitters, right?
four neurotransmitters, the principal transmitters of mood, wish, volition, libido, humor, all of it is in a chemical form. All of these things that we think of as personality come out and are in a chemical form in these neurotransmitters. However, if you're under chronic stress, as we have been, you're eventually depleted of these neurotransmitters. You are out of steam. You're running on fumes. You no longer can sleep because these neurotransmitters are essential for circadian rhythm. You can't sleep. You're not eating well. Your GI tract feels a mess. You can't concentrate. Your memory is dependent on these neurotransmitters. And you're essentially in a state of depletion. And there are many answers to this state of depletion. If it's severe enough, you need antidepressants, because that's essentially how they work. They replete the brain of the bath of neurotransmitters that you need to mentally function. And if this bath is empty, you can't function. If it's not that severe,
let me just jump in for a sec. So you are you are a psychopharmacologist. You're an MD in addition to a psychiatrist, right? So you really understand the biochemistry in terms of neurotransmitters, and you just said you need medication right at this point. So is it still, a lot of people feel that there's a weakness, right, if they take medication to get out of mental illness, right? And, what do you have to say to that?
Well, I think the stigma of having feelings that are severe enough that you would require medication is a kind of instinctual repulsion that we all have about crazy. It's terrifying to feel out of control. And what people do, many people, I practice in California, though I am a New Yorker originally, they fall back on original assumptions about why their mood or their inability to function comes from essentially almost a religious background. People say it's a failure of will that I'm feeling this badly, or it's because I've been a bad person that I'm feeling this badly. And rather than acknowledging the truth, which is, though it's the mind and it seems like it's your feelings and it's your relationship to music and other people and all these things, it's going on in an organ that you're prejudicing. You would never deny yourself insulin if you were a diabetic whose pancreas didn't make insulin. You would never not take an antihypertensive drug if you had unknown cause of hypertension, familial hypertension. You would never do that, and yet you would.
High blood pressure, yeah. So that would be for the heart. What you're saying is that, if you have different ailments of the body, there is a physical component to it that you're fixing through medicine. And the brain, although we think of it as like a spiritual entity, a cognitive entity, an intellectual entity who makes us us, it's also a part of our body that could be unhealthy based on biology.
Yes, it is made of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen. It is very organic. It's organic. The brain is an organ. And as I said, in these patterns of chronic stress, fight or flight, you're fighting for your life, even if you don't recognize that circumstantially. The old brain knows you're fighting for your life. That level of stress is going to lead to this depletion of neurotransmitters. And, if you get depressed enough, no amount of sleep, no amount of exercise, is going to replete it. You really need medicine.
So I always thought that, let's say the biological component of depression, anxiety, bipolar, any kind of mental illness is genetic, really, just like you might get hypertension because it's genetic, right? So you have the biology producing depression or anxiety, right? But you're also saying that depression or anxiety that could be experienced through COVID or racism is could cause a depletion of the neurotransmitters as well.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. And only 50% of our psychiatric disposition is determined genetically. Environment is extremely important. Even in utero, environments are extremely important. So it's not that it is entirely genetic, whether you'll suffer a major depression, whether you'll develop bipolar disorder, whether you'll have insomnia and anxiety. That is only 50% determined by genetics. And this is what I'm saying, why COVID has been such an unbelievable challenge to mental health, because this is life-threatening, existential threat, can throw us into states of depletion, which ultimately lead to depression.
You mean this, COVID and
Yeah,
racial injustice?
what we're enduring. Yes, that our country is on fire and that we're coming together. It's extremely hopeful, but we have big problems to solve. And we must, otherwise this threat isn't going away. I wanted to say, because though I'm a psychopharmacologist,
I'm also curious. I mean, this already. Yeah, I'm curious that, before this, there was a study, and correct me if I'm wrong, since the 90s that their suicide rates went up. Maybe I saw 33%. I don't know, highest suicide rates in teenagers ever because of social media and all that kind of stuff. It's already been a problem. And so you're basically saying that this is really going to accelerate that problem even more.
Well, you know what I think about this whole idea too of mental health crisis. Since its inception, psychiatry there's never been enough access. And it was developed in a setting in Vienna amongst the bourgeoisie who could pay.
Freud,
indeed. And the division, as though mental health were separate and didn't exist in a body, in a physical presence, this division is from the beginning. The Greeks even separated the mind from the body. And so it's always been a problem that there are an inadequate number of people to treat, to offer therapy, to offer psychiatric services. And COVID really brought forth to me the enormous problem of access. I think generationally, it's a very fortunate thing. I think I call them kids, anybody who's 30, in their 30s and younger.
Likely,
they know when they're in trouble in their mind. They're much more cognitively, they're much more sophisticated than past generations. I don't know what you're doing there, but about what you're suffering from mentally. And so I think not only is the demand for mental health going to go up in the face of COVID, the demand is going up culturally for people to be able to address their minds. That's the principal thing.
All right, KK, let me just interrupt for 1 second. Do you mind going a little bit over? Do you have time?
No. Are we watching a commercial, or is that just
No,
me?
I'm just jumping in because I just wanted to let everybody know that next week, because we're at the bottom of the hour, we're going to be talking about real estate, right? Which is also a zeitgeisty conversation. People are leaving the cities, and people are selling their apartments, and we're having Mike Lubin, who's a New York real estate agent. Clearly, he has great marketing behind him. But we're not just going to talk about residential. We're also going to talk about commercial real estate with Marlene and Jamal, and to talk about what's happening with office spaces and retail spaces and restaurants. So, how is the whole real estate situation going to change in the world of post-COVID and everything else that's happening in the world? Thanks for staying on, Kate. I will unshare, but everybody, you can subscribe or sign up at zeitguide.com/culture. And I'm going to just put it in the chat before we continue. Chat. You know, and again, you know, love if you do that, because I have to pay my team for this. So anyway, let's go back to Kate, and anybody could put questions in the chat as well.
Yeah, I'd welcome. I think it'd be terrific. I'd love to welcome questions. But one thing I just also wanted to add here, and I guess the CBT app was very useful, is that this time, in this isolation that's caused by COVID, it's never been more imperative that we try and get control of our minds. Easier said than done. But I want 3 M's to come out of this little discussion. Because, I mean, I believe in medication. I've been through 2 analyses. I know how good psychotherapy can be. But I believe you need additional practices.
So you're saying, like, focus on the biology, focus on the psychology, right?
Yes.
These practices, which you're going to basically do that are, it's like kind of like you need all 3, like mind, body, spirit, in a sense.
Yes. Every modality is required if you're going to get control of your mind. And I love this analogy. The Hindu religion has a description of the mind as a monkey holding by the string an elephant, and the monkey's jumping around like a mad person, leading the elephant through the forest, trampling on everything. And you got to get control of the monkey, make the monkey drop the rope.
The monkey mind, right?
A monkey mind, so that you can have an elephant peacefully in the forest. And again, easier said than done, but with a kind of spirit of generosity that Americans are finding, and this is happening internationally, people are offering incredible free services for learning transcendental meditation. It's the simplest kind. It's like the CBT of psychotherapy. It is by far the easiest thing to learn. And I'm moved by the amount of offerings that have come online from teachers to teach meditation. So that's one aspect of what I think is, if you've ever thought about it, now is the time, because you want control of the elephant and the string. And the other thing is,
now's the time to do what?
To learn meditation, to learn a form of calming the mind.
So you have to do that too, in addition.
Oh, indeed. I think so. Yes, I think so. And I think one other thing I want to, because I am not a guru and I wouldn't dare to offer, say, a spiritual teaching here, but I have been a practitioner since I was a teenager, that I'm just going to offer a small mantra for anyone here, one that I discovered a couple of weeks ago on a podcast by the Nancy Hulla and Sherry Salata show, and it was by Marcy Shimoff, who's a big researcher in happiness. And her mantra, I'm going to ask you all to do it, because you put your, no, it's a quick experiment. You're just going to say something 3 times. We're going to put our hands on our neck, our chests. Brad, you got to do it with me.
And I'm not going to do this every day, though. That's the hard part.
No, listen, it takes 2 seconds. Don't give me a hard time.
All right.
And you put your hands on your chest, and you're gonna say the following words as you close your eyes: love, love, ease, compassion. Love, ease, compassion. Love, ease, compassion. And you can say this anytime, anywhere. I promise, as you do this experiment, because it also presses oxytocin receptors in the brain, the hormone of love, that it melts some of the barriers to your own self-attacks, which is what we end up doing when we're alone and in isolation. And so a meditation practice is a goal. You can do love, ease, compassion while you're waiting online at Trader Joe's with your damn mask on and feeling frustration. You can say this and start going. And then the third thing is movement.
Like
The
exercise.
brain, movement. Everyone who's ever seen me as a psychiatrist knows I'm a fascist about exercise. And it isn't merely cardio, it's movement. And I'd like to suggest that a real yoga right now is movement and protest. That's also movement. It's meaningful movement. It's a yoga. It's a yoga to protest. And I've been trying to tie it together, how all of this does make sense. You need to do meaningful things to get out of this sense of being overwhelmed. And one of them would be to stand beside someone who needs you. It helps to not think about the self. Altruism is a great relief.
So again, practice, biology, therapy, right? You have to do all three. And that's great coming from a psychiatrist and a psychopharmacologist too, that you believe in these other things that people might think are like woo-woo or, you know, but it seems like now more than ever, we really need to meditate because of this and everything else that's happening around us.
Well, you need to meditate because all of these enormous problems will overwhelm you and you won't be present. You can't be present to anyone. You can't be present to yourself. The point of meditation is to be here now. And even just establishing that, even if the thing that you're coming together around is some kind of horror, like the murder of George Floyd, if you're present, you'll feel the joy that's available to you at any given moment. And I'm not only that I believe in this, it's that I've been a sufferer. I've had depression, I've had problems. I have a family with some serious genetic history for psychiatric problems. And I have witnessed again and again and again in family members, in myself, in people that I know, and tons of different patients, how effective these things that cost nothing can be. But I wouldn't do it alone. I think you need a sangha. It's a Buddhist term for your community. It's very, very hard to initiate things alone. Companionship is basically the fuel, the rocket fuel. Make a commitment with someone.
Because it's really hard to do it alone. I mean, I've tried. I mean, just
it's nearly impossible. It's nearly impossible, which is why it's good to begin with a teacher. And the teacher, of course, then is analogous to anybody in your life. But the point of being with peers, of trying to travel this piece of road with a companion, that's how we're built. We feel incredible relief by being together, typically. And so I would suggest that those three things,
meditation, mantra, and movement,
are done with others or with just one other, you're going to increase exponentially its efficacy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not to mention getting back to it every time.
What is your vision, though, of the future right now? I mean, clearly this trauma, this I think you call it COVID trauma or the era trauma, you know, mental health is going to be at a pinnacle in our society. What do you think needs to be done? You did mention funding, right?
Well, I think the I mean, just anecdotally, my own what forced me to change in a way. COVID forced me to change the way that I practice. I'd always insisted that a patient come see me physically. People come from Washington, New York, LA, whatever, but I've got to see them at least once in person, and to initiate meds, for example. And I'd held that as a rule until COVID, and a couple of different therapists called me. They had a 25-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 28-year-old, all of whom started new jobs and were either anxious or depressed or had ADHD. They needed treatment. And I just decided, you know, I talked about it with one other psychiatrist, a kind of person who I always have in my life as a supervisor. And I said, what do you think? He said, I think we all got to do it. We all have to do that. We all have to be more flexible. So the future is going to entail much greater flexibility of practitioners, which is going to, and so many people can't make it in to see me in the office. It's very obvious.
So you think the telemedicine trend is really gonna?
Yeah, yeah, I do. And I think it's been helpful. It certainly helped the 3 people I decided to see for the first time, just on video. And I think that increases access alone. It's a major instance of increasing access. And I think that just like we're fighting for social justice, an enormous portion of this has been, the money has been going into police and arming them to the teeth and not into social services that are required.
Right.
And
it's also interesting that I think the corporations are going to step up too. I think right before the CEO of Starbucks said that he was going to double down on investing in mental health treatment for the employees of Starbucks. And I think now is probably going to be even more with the layoffs. There's going to be more layoffs actually. And the conversations happening, the guilt, the shame, realizing that they are racist, a lot of, pent up or repressed anxieties or feelings are going to bubble up. So I really do think, I've been talking about this theme, the CEO as political leader, because clearly our politicians won't do anything, are going to step up and invest in these programs. So I want to ask a couple questions that people in the chat have asked, which are really interesting. So we didn't really, you mentioned 30-year-olds and some young people. We talked about teenagers before COVID having high suicide rates, social media addiction, all that stuff. But what do you think this, post-traumatic stress disorder from this experience is going to impact children? And what should we do?
Well, I don't know that the kids are experiencing it as trauma, an existential threat in the way that I described it. I think what kids are suffering from, and I watched my son, who is 15 and normally just a muscular, go-get-em, robust guy, no complaints ever, become kind of thin and wan and a little depressed due to the lack of stimulation. So developmentally, say a teenager, the way they develop is from peers, is the stimulation of peers. They work things out developmentally with each other. And they've been now 3 and 4 months separated from their peers. They literally look different. And so what I think that you're going to find, a kid who's really vulnerable to depression may even have frank symptoms of depression. These doesn't look like a frank symptom of depression to me and my son, but it's a depressed and diminished state. So the lack of stimulation diminishes ourselves. We need each other for reflection. We don't even know who we are until we're talking to someone else. You don't even have a sense of your existence till you're in conversation.
I'm going to put this in the chat. It's an interesting article that was just written in the Wall Street Journal about kids that I read about the toll that isolation takes on kids in the coronavirus era, right? And one of the things that I found interesting that I highlight here is that even in China, right, that there's evidence that social isolation may lead to mental health issues. About 23% of elementary students in Hubei province in China had symptoms of depression and 19% had anxiety symptoms. Like that's a big amount, right? That's a huge amount, and especially in another culture where mental health is probably even more of a stigma, I would think. Yeah,
more of a stigma, but they may have more practices. The Chinese have been meditating forever. I wouldn't underestimate. I think they look at psychic life. I'm sorry, forgive me. Turn that off. Just turn the phone off, right? Yeah, I mean, I think it's, like I said, I mean, I really think it's about isolation. What the psychic threat is, the isolation that we're all experiencing. And
how do you recommend that we connect with people in this age of social distancing? And, you know, like I said, we're going to be stuck inside of this. If there's a sequel to this pandemic in the fall and the winter, which
I heard someone say, we have to emphasize more, it's physical distance, not social distance.
Yeah, I've heard that.
We need to be together. And if you need a mask on to be together, and you need a lot of Purell in your purse, or you need to be on the porch while your mother is inside the house, you still need to do that. We need to do it more than ever. And expanding your, I call it a pod, but your pod of people where you can essentially kind of trace back their risk of infection, so that you can now, fortunately, you can be tested. You could establish a pod where you're saying, okay, we're negative and we're going to remain that way, but you're increasing the time that you're available to each other socially. Because really, the one thing that, I mean, not the one thing, there's so many things, but I mean, our evolutionary history dictates what we need to be well. And our evolutionary history is that we are not entities. We're not solo entities. We need each other.
How do you for the grandmas and the grandpas on the line? I know my mother and my father are both on. Hi guys. You know, they miss seeing their grandkids, right? So
it's awful.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think, like I said, if it's possible, I mean, it turns out it's a big to do, because I have in-laws here who are in their late 80s, and seeing my children is a huge part of their raison d'etre now. We've been going and visiting on the deck. We bring our own food, or we bring food to them. They wash it. They Purell the box. They put it in the microwave, and we eat the same food, but we're on a deck together. And we've kept, you know, we have a certain amount of physical distance. So physical distance, not social distance.
Right.
Is the takeaway.
Well, what about when it gets cold and we have to be inside? I'm not saying that you're Fauci or anything. I'm just saying that's going to be.
I am not Fauci. I am distinctly not Fauci. You know, I again, I mean, we're going to have to be together, and we're going to have to wear a mask. You're going to have warm clothes and go outside. I mean, this is one of these things about movement. Use the stress to motivate you. You've got to get outside. I don't care how cold it is. And that's because it's a way safer way to be together, is the outdoors. Again, your risk goes down.
Business idea. I want to get in the outside fire pit heating business.
Yeah.
Right? Anybody help me out with that? Okay. So here's another interesting question about big pharma. So it seems like pharma companies keep raising the age below which antidepressants can actually make kids more suicidal. Is it 25 now? Can you talk about that seeming paradox?
Yeah, I think what it is that you're, prior to the initiation of the medication, you're considering that kid to be unipolar depressive. They're not, they're bipolar. And when you put antidepressants on a bipolar person, you get mania. And mania doesn't have to be euphoric. Mania, an up, agitated, racing mind, can be dysphoric. So dysphoric that you're suicidal. But you're not, so the term is a mixed state. So very likely the suicidal child put on antidepressants is bipolar. And that's not understood prior to the initiation of meds.
And there's, when people say bipolar, they think of manic depression. Like the famous person was Patty Duke, who kind of came out, the actress who came out for being bipolar. But there's other kinds of bipolar now, like bipolar 2.
Mm-hmm.
And so could you explain? So you're talking about maybe not just bipolar 1, you're talking about bipolar 2. And
No, bipolar 1 exists in children.
Okay, of course.
Full-blown disease, full-blown mania, full-blown everything. So, I mean, it's a very important fact. People don't think kids can have the full-blown disorder, but they can indeed. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what you want to say about it. We're recognizing a significant number of people get worse on antidepressants. They get worse on them.
Where they get better for a little while and then it gets worse again.
Typically, they're just not seen often enough. You can tell right away when people are getting worse on antidepressants if you see them frequently enough, which I make sure I do when I'm practicing. But the issue is that fortunately, as the arsenal of medications and the pharmacopoeia itself has grown, there are many, many ways to treat, I'm just going to say, mood.
Define mood, because that's a really, that's a word that's used in psychology and psychiatry, from what I've learned.
Well, mood is another term for state, the state you're in. And the state can shift, right? Back and forth. And just as your mood can, from depressed to sunny, and your states can change, which is the point of what a meditation practice is to change your state, change the state you're in, to go from agitated, anxious, angry to calm. It's a state change. It's a mood change. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Anybody have any other questions for Kate?
Andiamo.
Yeah. So we can't really continue. So it's really the vaccine, you think, that is going to enable us to be not social or physical distance anymore? Is that really true as a medical expert?
Yeah, I mean, my brother is on the enormous efforts he's an AIDS epidemiologist, and he's joined Fauci, and he's on, essentially the guiding board for the vaccine. And this is a very good news about a lot of things that COVID has sped up. And one of them is science.
Yeah.
And the amount of collaboration. And it's just astonishing. We're going to have something faster than we've ever had before.
Right.
And presumably simultaneously.
They would keep it up to themselves. They would keep it to themselves so they could get published in Science magazine or the New England Journal of Medicine. It seems like
sweetheart, that is an awful, awful view of scientists. That is so not.
Well, that's what I heard. I actually worked in that Sinai one summer, and that's what I learned.
Okay.
So that's not true. You just debunked a myth.
Well, it's not my experience. I mean, it's not my experience of scientists. And I've been enjoying these UCSF weekly grand rounds on COVID. And the scientists themselves are over the moon about the level of collaboration that's going on. It's as though
technology too.
Right. No, but it's also as though the goal is now we have one goal. It's all to be safe. And you're right. The goal had been, publish or perish, to rise in academic hierarchy. And that really seems to almost have dissolved at the moment. Scientists are really, they're operating on a higher plane, ethically.
What about globally? Like how, are we, let's say we see the tension between us and China right now, right? Are scientists from China and the United States working together?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a lot of international collaboration, and I think, you know, we should have every confidence that we're going to get a vaccine, and we're going to get it much sooner than has ever happened before. How effective it's going to be is a big question. You know, just like with influenza, it only protects 60% of us from the flu, but 60% would be great.
And now they just came up with that steroid, right? That people said that's reduces the death rate as well. So, you know, we're going to have other drugs.
There'll be a lot of different kinds of interventions. Just like there's a decent antiviral you can take if you have flu, which shortens your length of illness and mitigates your symptoms. We'll have antivirals.
I'm calling Anderson Cooper and Sanjay Gupta right now to have you replace what's since Fauci can't speak on record. That's awesome. Last thing we have to talk about, and then we'll let you go. Diversity and inclusion in the medical community, especially in psychology and psychiatry.
It's brutal. It's brutal. You know, it's the place where it has to start is early education. Mm-hmm. Because having gone to medical school is a language. It's a whole language you have to learn and master. And so science as a language has to begin early. And terms and the kinds of terms that you and concepts that you need to begin early. And that's the only way we're going to increase the number of people who make it all the way to medical school. To make that population a diverse population, you can't start in high school and college. It has to be early.
And do you think because of telemedicine and a lot of people are, you know, fearful that doctors won't make as much money? I mean, I heard that conversation before. Or it already seems like fewer people are going to medical school than they did in the 80s or 70s or 90s even. Is that true, or is that also?
Well, it waxes and wanes. You know, when there's an economic downturn, it's impossible to get into medical school. When Wall Street is, you know, on fire and people are making tons of dough at other things, and medical school admissions applications go down. But I think that our economy, medical economy, at the moment is serving no one, really. It's certainly not serving patients. And, you know, the things that are paid for, the whole medical economy is based on procedures. That's what gets paid for by insurance. It's not therapy. It's not the time you spend with your primary care doc talking about breast cancer risk factors. It's about equity and changing the way you're reimbursed for what kind of care you're delivering.
It seems like, especially in New York, where I'm from, it's like a rich person's disease, mental illness. But on the flip side, like what we said before, like it's the brain, which is a medical organ. If you're getting insurance to cover a heart attack, you should have insurance to pay for.
Well, I think that's really obvious. I'd like to give people just a pearl about accessing mental health, good mental health, in case they can't afford it.
Yeah.
Which is, you'll always go to major medical centers. In New York, you have Columbia, NYU, Cornell. Get on the wait list, on the clinic wait list, and you will see, as the people who I took care of when I was training, an excellent, excellent resident. And you will also, that resident has supervision in psychopharmacology, in analysis, in cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's true. Psychiatric training is superb. And you will get in, and you will, of course, if your problem is super complex, you'll get to see the head of the department. Always look for major medical centers if you feel you can't afford care, because that is the point of training, is to treat the poor.
Let's end on that note. That's really
okay.
inspirational. That's so Okay, so we could go to medical centers. We got to do the 3 M's: meditation, mantra, and movement.
Yes.
Find a good shrink in the medical center and take drugs.
In a nutshell, I don't know if that is, or no punning.
Well, I'm a
Yeah, I
simplifier,
mean,
right? It's my job, a simplifier, right?
anyway, it was delightful to be on, and I hope everybody is taking care of themselves, because this is a time to not fall apart. And whatever I'll give Brad a list of resources and various things that that people can access, so that I'm not leaving with you guys with empty hands.
Okay. And if there's any other information, Kate, like you're not, oh, that's the other thing. You're ungoogleable, so we can't find you. I love that. All right.
So far.
After this,
we shall see.
You'll be Googleable. Kate
I might be
Beyrer,
Googleable.
everybody. You're amazing.
Okay.
Thank you for your inspiration. And I just look at these chats. They love you. Everybody in culture class loves you.
Oh,
So,
well, it's my pleasure.
Right?
Take care, everyone.
Love, ease, compassion.
Love. Don't forget the ease. Ease is so key.
Love, ease, compassion.
Love, ease, compassion. Love, ease, compassion.
All right. Love you, Kate.
Namaste. Ciao, ciao.
See you next week. Real estate. That'll help our mental health. Not.
Gotcha.